Well, welcome everybody. We'll just do the intros again real quick. Dave Gates, Fire Chief.
Alan Baker, Executive Assistant.
Ryan O'Hearn, Assistant Chief.
Christy Pincock, Office Manager.
Eric Anderson.
Andy Goldenhauer, President 187.
Shane Grohl, Battalion Chief.
Scott Lockhart, Local 187.
Awesome. And obviously we'll probably have to speak up a little bit because the masks definitely make some of the conversation difficult. So we kind of left off last time. I think we put some things still down that we probably need to talk about. Since Christy's here, and I don't know if Christy, you want to stay the whole time, but why don't we just talk real quick about the FLSA cycle and kind of get that one out. I think you have the best handle on it. I'm certainly I could speak around it, but.
Sure. I sent an email out to you guys so you would have time to look at and go over the information that I was able to gather. I received a copy of the shift schedule from both Blackfoot and Idaho Falls, and they are not working the same shift schedule, those two departments. And so looking at lining up to those departments on or around October 1st was kind of where we were looking at in the schedule and the analysis. Looking at the dates that Shane proposed, starting with the C platoon schedule would actually create FLSA overtime to two schedules. If we looked at transitioning either on the middle shift of an A platoon or a middle shift of a B platoon, the FLSA overtime impact would be smaller. So from all of the literature that we can find, I think I sent you guys the IEFF's standpoint that kind of talked about how to look at FLSA cycles and when they're changing. And what they talk about is the change needs to be for permanent reasons, not just to avoid overtime. And so you take the FLSA period that is ending and you take your new one and you look at where they would overlap, and you have to decide where the overtime should be paid. So you may be counting those hours in both the 9-day cycle and then also in the 18-day cycle when they're overlapped. And so we can spend more time, understanding that, but really that's what the IEFF document talks about. 29 CFR 778.301 talks about overlapping when the change work week is made. 778.302 does a computation of overtime, so that's the actual regulations that the IEFF documents are referring to when they do those. So if you look at those, again, no matter what date range is ultimately selected for the transition, if we want to line up with Idaho Falls or with Blackfoot's schedule, I think that we need to do it on one of those 2 days. I don't know that it really matters to you guys whether you started with the C platoon day. I think it looked good initially, but again, it just created a larger overtime cost. And then I think once an actual date is set, then you need to look at the amount of time worked in there. But what we're strictly referring to is the FLSA overtime, number of hours worked in a period. So to you guys, that's the premium hours paid in addition to your bi-weekly base pay.
And so was that possible that we could move the FLSA cycle up to the 29th of September?
Not clear to the 29th of September. That still created some.
I thought the one you gave me here said the 29th of September, it would be it would only cause one shift of premium hour issues instead of two.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, looking here, the 29th of September is the middle of an A platoon, so that is one of the two that it looks like we could do.
Okay.
So the middle of an A platoon, is what would put us in line with, looks like with the Idaho Falls schedule. If we moved in the middle of the B platoon shift, that lined us up with the Blackfoot. If we're not interested in lining up with either of those, we can pick a date and look at what's just best, but we want to make sure the overtime impact is minimized. And by doing that, it's looking at the cycles and how many shifts it puts each platoon working.
I think going to the Idaho Falls schedule, it didn't correlate as far as like with Boise, our C shift wouldn't be with their C shift, but it would be, our 48 would be the same as their 48. And so maybe our C platoon would work with their A platoon, but it would be the same each time, where Blackfoot is in the middle. And so you would, I thought it would be better to go to the Idaho Falls, just because then you wouldn't be, your 48 would be with the 48, even though it's your C platoon would be with their B or A or whatever. That's my opinion.
So Christie, I apologize, I did not print that out. I should have, but what was the day in October? It was like the 2nd or 3rd?
So if we look at our current schedule, if you just look at the middle shift of any of the go rounds, so Shane is correct. If we were to try and do it on an A platoon one, we would need September 29th would be the middle shift. Otherwise, it would move it to October 8th. B would be October 2nd. But again, no, not necessarily saying that's the exact date. I know that's the goal date, but I think as long as we identify that when a date is set, we need it to be either a middle shift is really looks like the best spot to transition for the lowest impact
Okay.
to the FLSA cycles.
And it has to be a middle shifter for A or B,
And-
not C.
And I guess we would have to go back and look again at C. I was also trying to match up to either Blackfoot or Idaho Falls. And so with using A and B, we were able to. We could potentially have C in there, whether that, what the schedule would look like, we would have to just, we could throw those days
Okay.
in there. But it seemed like the middle shift was kind of that best move, because it still allowed one platoon to have their four off. The other platoon actually ended up having maybe 5 off before they started back. And then one was having to work 4 days within the 9-day FLSA cycle they were leaving, but they were still only working 6 shifts or 6 24-hour days within the 18-day cycle that was going into. So that's where we're saying that there is one shift that will have overtime. But where everybody starts on a different cycle right now, there's not really a way around that. But to get it down to one platoon rather than 2 is, I think, would be the goal of the department. And goal to
I think
minimize
that's easy.
cost.
We just need to pick the date, right? We know how to do it now. We just need to pick
We
the
have,
date.
yeah, we have 2 options right now. If we needed to look at a C platoon option, we could look at that. But yeah, those dates could really be plugged in anywhere in the calendar, whether it's October, November. One thing to look at as well, January 1st, December 31st, and January 1st, that December 31st is the middle of a B platoon shift, and that is a transition that then has a full calendar year on 4896. So that's a potential date as well, as the calendar is shifting.
And Chris, you remind me, but wasn't it the Blackfoot schedule that actually made it so that this year no platoon would work Christmas Eve and Christmas back to back? That was,
Just for this year, though?
that I don't know that. I certainly didn't
Yeah.
contract it out, but we knew that the Blackfoot schedule was actually set up for this year. It would not be.
This year, Christmas Eve and Christmas Day are 2 different platoons on the Blackfoot calendar I have. The Idaho Falls calendar does have Christmas Eve and Christmas Day both being worked by platoon, so.
Not that's make or
require
break,
that
just food for
modification.
thought, right?
But either in any manner, whichever way you go, I think that we can do it and minimize, but that's our biggest impact that we need to look at on the move. So that would be all I propose. With the information that was sent out and looking at the FLSA overtime, did that, and looking at the, they call them overlapping work periods or that, does that part make sense to everybody on how those are being looked at? So, okay. So if there's not questions on that, that is the information I have to share on
So is
some
it,
proposed timeframe for changes.
Okay, is it worthwhile for us to refine our implementation date or target now? Or is it something we want to wait on still?
I think right now we have a target. We'd like to be, I mean, it can't be before October 1, but we'd like it to be sometime, you would like it to be sometime near.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of premature to sit down and spend a lot of time. We know what we have to do. We're going to pick a middle shift of one of the platoons, and that's the least impact, and that we would transition around that date. So it's pretty quick that once we get close enough to say we have a material date, or if we feel like we have confidence in a likely policy document, then I think we can, hard and fast that going forward.
I just ask, because if we have a better target date, some of the things like the vacation mapping might be dependent on that a little bit. And we could be more prepared when the time comes if we have something picked out.
I think we could keep the date that we started with.
Okay.
We just move the FLSA period instead of the 3rd, we move it to the 29th. Is that what the circled date is?
Yeah.
And
I don't know if you can do that because technically the transition can't go before October 1.
the schedule can't.
I think once you implement the work or the pay period, FLSA cycle, I think that is, the schedule is starting at that point. Does that make sense?
And I think we could do an MOU if we needed to, but the FLSA is defined in the contract. So, it would just, if we were trying to do it prior to October 1, then we would have to have both sides sign an MOU to implement, which could be problematic, but shouldn't be.
Okay.
I don't think we have any real strong feelings on which platoon starts it, how it works. If it needs to be October 1st when the FLSA, I think we're okay with that, if it just makes everyone's life easier.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
We want
We're
it
not-
to be as seamless as possible.
Yeah, we don't, there's no deal breaker as far as the date goes. We just want it to be seamless and easy.
Okay.
And one thing also, if that timeframe of October 1st is working, the pay date of September 29th is actually in fiscal year 22's pay cycle because of the way it's paid. And so that is actually part of the new pay cycle because those dates would not be paid until the October 15th paycheck for that September 29th.
Okay. So you're saying it would be better from a payroll standpoint if we,
Not better, I'm just saying it's, although it is in before October 1st, it is within the pay cycle that's still paid within the FY22 contract. So those hours are
okay.
the way the pay cycles happen. Because of the payroll process, that is actually part of a pay period that's considered FY22 pay period.
So it's not that they're going to be in the same pay period. They're not going to be in different ones.
Okay?
Okay.
Any questions for Christie or for that? All right. Shane, did you ever have a chance to talk to Dr. Sandy about
I did.
this thing? And what did he?
So I've got a fatigue policy. Let me just. I've got a basic fatigue policy, and This is a conglomeration between myself, Dr. Sandy's input, and some research that I've done. I have 6 key features of this. So the first, and I guess my goal here is to give you these key features of my fatigue policy, and then it would have to go to an SOG committee and be designed so that we could implement it into the department. But I think we can agree on the key features and then move on with implementation of the schedule, and then we can work out the details of all of these things later.
So I'm going to just tell you that's not the way it is. From my perspective, the city's not going to work that way. The city's not going to say, well, we're going to agree to a really basic outline. Their concept, at least the way I've understood what they want, is they want our policy document to be finalized for 4896, and that it's going to be agreed upon prior to going into the 4896.
So what you're telling me in my head, what my head is hearing you say is that you're not agreeing to the tentative agreement to the 4896? That we're not going to it, or?
No, I'm
it
saying
feels like you're stalling.
No.
And you don't, no, I'm just telling you what the story in my head is saying. Okay? And so there's a couple of things in here that are not going to happen or can't happen. For example, this, our shift trades and residency requirements, those can't happen. We can't negotiate for that. Those are in the contract and they have their own clause. So in order for us to open that clause and negotiate that, that's regressive bargaining. And we can't do that. Or at least that's my understanding.
So, and I believe the city feels that part of the scope of 4896 was so broad that literally we are negotiating those things in this underlying of this process. That's the way I understand it. So, you and I can disagree, and I guess we can go to fact finding to find out what that is, but that's my understanding, is that this was so broad that they didn't want to get, the details would take longer than what we really had in terms of the 4896 or within the negotiation cycle to hammer that out.
I'll defer to the negotiating committee then.
That's the way I see it, and I guess, if we want to get a legal opinion, that's fine. I'm not here to try and say that is what it is or isn't. I believe that there are a lot of moving parts to this. I think, I have a grave concern that 4896 will cause problems with callback from a distance perspective. I feel that a 72-hour shift trade.
And to discuss, the reality of it is we're not here to discuss the merits of the 4896. We're here to discuss the implementation and how we go to the schedule. I understand it's not your favorite and you don't like it, right? But, I can't, this isn't the forum for us to give you evidence to support the moving to the 4896. This forum is designed to implement the policy.
No, it says to implement the implementation policy, which includes the things that we want to feel that we need to iron out.
A policy document which will be incorporated by the CBA for the criteria of the 4896 schedule.
All right. So what is the criteria? I believe residency could be part of the criteria. I believe that shift trade policy could be part of the criteria, or should be part of the criteria.
And see, and how I interpret that is it's a 3-platoon system with which each employee will work 2 consecutive 24-hour shifts for a total of 48 hours and have 96 consecutive hours off. That's how we implement the 4896. That is what the policy should be.
Well, then what would be the point of having a policy document if we're just going to implement that? I already know what the schedule is. So you're telling me we're going to sit around and have a conversation about how to implement something that we already know how to implement it. I know how to get there from the FLSA perspective. That's not why they crafted that document, to say that we would come to terms under the implementation. That's their take. So,
okay.
If we were to look at it from the simplicity of what you're talking about, then there is no delay, because The schedule is the schedule. It's the 4896 schedule. There is no conversation about, it's not like I'm arguing that it's a 4896, oh, but you're going to work an extra day, or you're not going to work an extra day. We're talking about the city's perspective was that this was a 4996. We were going to develop a policy document that made both parties feel comfortable with implementing 4896. Otherwise, it would be, in my opinion, pointless to have even created it the way they did. Because what is the implementation? There is no implementation.
And so if that's the interpretation, I'll have to defer to the people on the.
And that's fine. I mean, we can
That's not how I
stop today and we can go get legal opinion on what that means and, you know.
So I think that, I guess my understanding of it is that we are here to discuss specifically things like when we're going to start our FLSA cycles, what the exact transition date will be. There are some things that we obviously need to identify and agree on, like what current policies need to be updated, things like that. But to bring in this really broad, try and capture the whole contract again in this forum and renegotiate it is definitely not the appropriate thing to do.
In your opinion? I don't feel that that's what.
We aren't negotiating teams here.
That is what I thought our negotiating team, and that's what the guidance for me has been, is to come in here and work with you on things to resolve areas of complexity.
And we can resolve stuff, but the negotiations are complete. The teams have agreed that we are ready to finalize the contract and ratify it. So to go and bring in all these extra really broad things that reach way back into the contract is not, I don't think, appropriate for this.
And
This
I
setting in
disagree
this
with
forum.
you. I believe that the contract and the contract that we are ratifying says we are going to sit down and we are going to come to terms that we both agreed to. Those terms being pretty expansive and global, which is why it will be implemented October 1 of 2022 if we can't come to agreement. But then if no agreement can be reached beyond that, it will go back to the old schedule. That's why they put that in, was to say, we're going to come to terms. And so if, in your opinion, if you feel that that caveat was given simply to decide what day we would start and what minor policies we might change, then I think that's, I don't know why the city would have gone to all the trouble to say we're going to create a 4896 policy document with all the layers that are added into that. Because simply we were going to say, well, when are we going to do this?
I have a hard time seeing, and I could very well be wrong, but I have a hard time seeing city legal and HR saying, we're done negotiating. We put all this work into this, but we've wrapped it up, and now we're just going to turn it over to another group that's not negotiation teams and let them reopen everything we just worked on, everything we just finished up. That doesn't make any sense to me either.
Then I can stop and go back to my body and find out if they have different guidance.
So if I can bring up Article 36, the procedural agreement in the contract, Section 12, it talks about parties mutually agree that each party will make new contract demands and offer proposals on bargaining subjects or issues for consideration in the contract negotiations before or during the third negotiation section, except by mutual agreement and unless it's limited by the contract. So what we're doing here is we're bringing two new proposals. We're bringing a proposal to open up Article 29 and Article 21. We can't do it simply bound by the contract. We can't open new articles.
But
Can't do it.
what we can do is we can develop policies that are departmental policies that are not altering the contract that's agreed to. I think that's what we're here to do. And SOGs, like Shane's saying, things that would fall into that category. And we can have a fatigue policy, but it can't violate the contract.
Would you agree?
Can I ask you, I don't have the contract in front of me. You mentioned 21, and what are those two articles.
So Article 21 is shift change.
And trades.
So it's dealing with trades, and it says, upon approval by the battalion chief, any employee will have the right to exchange shifts with any other employee. And the issue that we've talked about here last meeting was that we don't want battalion chiefs approving trades. It's in the contract. We can tweak that later on down the road if we need to, but we literally can't change it by our own contract.
But we have further language in SOG that defines trades and conditions under which they can or that they're allowed. So we can still work on some of that language without changing contract language.
Okay, and then we're willing to talk about, the SOGs and the policies of the department, but we can't undo the contract.
And Eric, do you mind if I just add to that real quick? I think Eric brought this up last time too, that, we have a policy that exists regarding trades that is pretty well defined, and maybe the solution to this whole thing is just to watch it closer than we are, put a little bit more emphasis on it. Because it's there, it exists, and it can be adjusted if it needs to, but at a policy level, not at a contract level.
Yeah, I think the current SOG contains language that already addresses some of the things that I understood were the topic of discussion in the last meeting. And I apologize that I wasn't able to be present for that meeting, but we do have an SOG that further delineates shift rates. So, and I think that that's where you would look. So.
Well, and I don't think that the current SOG would be that much different from what we're talking about. Basically it just says that any trades above 48 hours are going to be special considerations.
Correct.
And so, anything, if you wanted to do a trade on the 4896, it was going to put you in a 72. I think that should have special consideration. I don't think that there even needs to be a change.
You can continue.
I think the big dispute last time was that the chief wanted to move to having someone a higher level than the battalion chief make that decision, which the contract
And
says that
have
too.
no 72-hour trades, right?
I'm in favor of no 72 hours. I think that's too long. And especially when you talk, everybody's going to be exhausted by 48 hours, so that's...
Well, that's hypothetically. Right?
I don't think so.
Well, we do work 72-hour trades now. They're not ideal, they're not great, but we do them now. But a guy that works at, let's say, the airport fire station, are you willing to give that guy a little extra leniency, or is this just a hard and fast, cut and dry, no way?
No, I would be willing to give that extra leniency. That's obviously a different situation, for sure. Not going on calls.
Yeah. And I know for a fact that 72-hour trades are getting declined pretty frequently. I've had a couple decline in the last couple of years, just because I was working at too busy of a station or whatever. So I think our policy that we have isn't broken.
Yeah, that would indicate to me that the policy is working as intended right now.
But we're willing to talk about the SOG, and we're willing to talk about what we got going on now. But I guess my point I'm trying to make is opening up an article. I don't think we can do it.
Okay. Well, I'll have to get further guidance on what their expectation is on that. Because,
Okay.
at this point, I would point out that the contract isn't ratified on either side, so.
Right. And so I guess that's what you're saying is that.
Clearly, if this becomes that, then I guess maybe they will say that then we won't ratify it. I don't know. I don't know that.
Yeah. So then we go back to the table and un-TA this. Is that what we want to do?
I don't know. Eric, I'm not trying to hype up. I wasn't on the negotiating team. I've only talked to the people that told me what they kind of wanted to accomplish out of this.
I guess that's kind of the point, is that, again, we aren't the negotiation team, so we shouldn't be negotiating the contract.
So one of the things that Shane said that I'm telling you is not okay. You're saying change department policy. I'm saying we're going to have it signed and changed here whatever we do change is going to be done here, and it's not going to be oh, well, we'll talk about it and then we'll send this recommendation to the SOG committee and let the SOG committee approve it. We will get the writing that we want. So the trade policy could be the trade policy. Okay, it could be that the battalion chief still, I can't take away who approves it, but we may come out of this saying there isn't anything over 48-hour trades for anybody who runs a station. I don't know. That's the part that I'm talking about. But it will be written down and we'll all agree to those changes in the SOG before we implement 4896.
Okay, I think that sounds reasonable. So if we start hammering out the stuff that we can agree on,
Sure.
and work on Shane's idea, and if we can get a document that we can all live with, then I think we're on the right track, right? And then we can get
We're
clarification
certainly
on this
moving
other
closer.
stuff. And then on the stuff that we're having issues on, get clarification and meet again in a week or so. That's what I would like to see happen, but
Sure.
I'm just.
Are we intending to come up with the requirements for policies that will be given to SOG committee to put into the format and put into our existing list of administrative policies? Or are we planning on having a third set of documents?
That's a good question. I can't say that I actually know the answer to that.
Okay, because it would seem to me that a third set would be necessary. We can come up with the requirements to hand down to the SOG committee and then say, put it in SOG format, write it up with these requirements, and then we have one.
Or we can just rewrite the SOGs in this meeting and say this is what the new SOG is going to say, and this is what, we're going to take an SOG that exists, or we're going to, if we're creating something entirely new, then the entirely new SOG will still have to have the framework.
Okay, but we're still going to do SOGs. We're not thinking about making a whole separate set of documents.
That I can't speak to what, this, I think we have to be careful, because this says that we're going to create a policy document. So that policy document, if we take it literally in negotiation terms, which you kind of seem to be doing, then we have to create a policy document, and that might have to be an entirely separate policy document, at least for now, and then at some point it could be baked into the current policy. Do I think that's the best act? I don't know. I guess it depends on how easy this process is and what we can come to terms with. Because that policy document is what, at the end, the council will ratify. That's what my side's conversation has been about, is that we are going to sort through the details, we're going to come up with an appropriate policy document, and the appropriate policy document would then be ratified, much like an MOU, and it would be ratified by both sides.
But it seems silly to have the city council dictate and approve policy that our operating policy.
Well, Shane, you can say it's silly, but I can tell you right now that the police department, all of their policies go in front of, and so does the city policy handbook, all goes in front of the city council. So in this particular sense, whether you think it's silly or not, that's the direction that this city wants to go. This is not a departmental policy document. It is specific to the negotiations of that, which, in my opinion, since it's a lot like an MOU, it is a lot like a negotiation. It's us coming to terms with what we're acceptable with, and I don't, we can argue for 2 hours whether I'm right, you're right, who's right. I'm just telling you that's what my side's belief was that we were going to create this document that was acceptable to both sides, and it would be ratified by both sides, much as if an MOU. And therefore, it is kind of negotiating. That's what MOUs are. We kind of come to terms and say, well, we want to do this, just like we did with the wildland engines. We created an MOU that we agreed to in order to make happen. So
what does this document look like? How do we get going on it? I mean, honestly, like, is it SOG form? Is it like an MOU form? What do we want this thing to look like?
Well, I think right now, Eric, we're just trying to hammer out some of the things that we think should be included. We've talked basically some metrics. We've talked about a specific implementation date, how we would implement in terms of the transition. You know, at some point when we get closer to that, it would say that we're going to implement on this date. This will be the new FLSIA cycle, and that would be the transition. And it would outline any of the other things that we all agreed to in order to get to the 4896 schedule.
So, you know, I mean, Scott already provided in negotiations what was really close to an implementation guide and a policy document. I mean, I think if we're going to go down that road, I think that's the basis where we should start and look at that document and then make adjustments to it. There's a few things. I mean, there's a few things you brought up, like a residency requirement. I can tell you right now, our membership will have nothing to do with a residency requirement.
And again, residency is addressed in the contract.
Okay.
But I think that we've already got a document on the table that we can look at and refine and look at putting those dates in. And I don't have a problem with what you're saying and looking at things that we think are potentially going to be problems. But I do know, like I said, our membership's not going to bite off on a residency requirement.
So Andy, I guess the question that I have for you is that, okay, we know that people will live further and further away. When they have a 48-hour schedule, they're going to live further away. So what do you propose? I'm not going to be here, but what do you propose to do when we have the large fire that, I mean, our station assignments right now per NFPA are for a bread and butter residential 2,000 square foot structure fire. We have basically Chubbuck, who might be able to throw 2 additional engines at something that's larger. You guys are the ones that are going to be fighting the fire with one platoon. And what are you going to do when enough people live far enough away that you can't? And you're saying that they don't want to bite off on it, but I think that...
What does every other department that runs a 4896 do?
A lot of them have a lot more people, a lot of other fire departments around that are offering supplemental assistance. We don't have that depth.
Like Idaho Falls, Blackfoot, they don't really. And it's not like Boise browns out engines to create fatigue. They don't do that.
Well,
Or to alleviate fatigue.
I guess going back to that, I would have 2 questions. I mean, first, why do we know it will happen? And second, even if a small number do, how do we know that that's going to impact our callback?
well, I think it impacts our... Scott, I don't have a crystal ball, but the fact is, if you live 4 hours away, you're really not available to come in to a structure fire that's happening right now.
But why do we believe or know that that's going to happen? And why do we know that so many people are going to do it, that it's going to impact?
Because I know firefighters who live in Coeur d'Alene that commute to LA.
That is a very different situation than what we have here. And an example or two does not prove that it is an issue.
Well, it doesn't prove it's not. So we don't...
So therefore, we shouldn't use that argument if we can't prove either way.
Let's not talk
Right.
about residency today. We already have, right now, that's one of the ones that Eric has said, look, it's kind of off limits in negotiation. I'll go get further guidance on my side as to what their goal is on that, and we can talk about something different. I'm willing to talk about the fatigue policy and what you want to do with that.
You want to hear what I have to say?
Huh?
Okay.
That's what we started with.
But I thought you said it wasn't going to happen. That the
Well,
city wasn't going to agree.
what I said was that we were going to make the policy before the 4896 is implemented, and the policy is going to be implemented, and it will be ratified by the union and the council.
And all I'm bringing...
The only thing that I was saying that wasn't going to happen was you kind of made a suggestion that you would give some basic guidance to the SOG committee, and the SOG committee was going to update or make this policy. And I'm just saying, I don't think that's going to work for this situation.
That's fine. I can give basic guidance to this group if this group is the one that decides to make the policy. But I don't have any desire to create the policy myself. This is just research that I've come up with that I think is a good idea. And if you guys think it's a good idea, then great.
Okay.
But the SOG committee, I think, is a valid forum for this. And if it has to be decided here, then we can do it here. But, so there's 6 or 7 points here that I think should be addressed in a fatigue policy. We should use, a lot of this information I got from, just to give you my references, I got from a implementation guidebook from a study done from 2018 that is a fatigue risk management guideline for emergency medical services. It is supported by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and is done by a couple of doctors. And anyway, that study's right here. So one of the first things that they say is they say to use an objective measurement tool to determine fatigue. In talking to Dr. Sandy, I think the one that is probably most appropriate, and I don't, when I say most, I still don't know that it is actually appropriate, is the app that's designed by NASA. It's called the NASA PVT, and PVT stands for?
We know. We've looked it up.
Okay.
We've actually found 2 vendors already that.
Psychomotor Vigilance Test, for those that don't know.
Vigilance Test, yes.
Vigilance Test. And it's supposed to be a fairly accurate and fairly good representation of fatigue. However, there's a couple of pros and cons with it. It's only for iOS systems, so people like me that don't have an iPhone don't have access to it. I didn't download it. I don't have an iPhone, so I didn't get a chance to try it. It's used to study astronauts. It's not used to study firefighters, so I don't know the validity of what it's actually studying. It is tentatively supported from Dr. Sandy. He said that he liked it. He is gonna, I gave him the research and the articles that were forwarded to me, and he's gonna read those.
So Shane, we found 2 vendors. One that we really did like, this is a computer-based one. It's based on the same.
And that's the fatigometer?
Yeah.
Those are the ones I put on the
And
agenda
the
today.
studies that I've read said that if you can do it on an app or an iPad, you get more accurate results. So and then the fatigometer seemed to be more representative for disorders like ALS and not necessarily EMS workers.
Okay.
And so that's why, I don't know if that one is going to test what we really want it to test.
So I actually emailed that vendor, just so that you guys have an idea of what it was like when they sent me a demo, and I tried it today. It allowed me to go in, enter my name, I could set it up as an employee number or email address to log in. I would log in, and then it immediately sent me a link that allowed me to enter that ID number, and it opened like the equivalent of a PVT test. And so I ran it a few times, and it establishes a baseline. And so you can do 2 or 3 or even 4 of these as your baseline when you're alert and awake. And then it will track it, and you can actually, like say you had an incident and you wanted to check somebody's fatigue, you could have them take that test at that moment, and then it would compare the results to their baseline. And so they have other apps that are designed to do more like medical conditions, but this one was used, and the fatigometer is based, I believe, in Europe, and they use it for a lot of their drivers and stuff that are like city employees. And so they use that as their metric for testing if fatigue was a contributor to like an incident. It was really easy to use, and it gave me results immediately on whether I was quick enough on my testing, or if we're too slow, it'll give you an error. Like tell you that, you're in a critical zone, and it does allow for multiple users, which was the nice thing, that we could track it and it was linked to an ID. On the NASA app, I've been playing around with that, and the only thing I couldn't see there is how we would get specific IDs for each person. And there's a few other programs out there. I'm still doing some research. There's one by Joggle Research. They're supposed to send me some more information with the links I can try it. And that's one thing about these apps is if they're just an individual download, that doesn't really work because not everybody has either a Samsung or an iPad. So we're trying to look for a more universal program that would be equivalent to that. But we haven't decided on anything. We're still doing part of the research phase.
But the point is it's objective, and that's what we're looking for.
And that's what I would suggest we do, is find an objective, find something that's objective,
100%.
that works for us, but make sure that it's, I think we have to be careful about what we decide, because if we choose a test that's designed for CDL drivers, that doesn't necessarily correlate with firefighters and EMS workers.
And that is
It may, but it
Okay.
doesn't necessarily.
Joggle Research, they use it on the International Space Station, but they also use it for medical personnel. And so they are going to get back to me, I believe, on Thursday. And so they actually use it to test fatigue in medical personnel. So once we get a little more information on that, we could bring that back to the group or share that information with you guys, and then you could.
Okay.
Was the fatiguometer on a desktop computer?
That one was on a desktop. Now the other one is actually, I believe, iPad based. So we could, if there's iPads available at each station, they could have it there. So there's different features of each program.
And that's the Joggle one?
That's the Joggle Research
And
one.
that, I think, is based on the NASA one, right?
I think they're
Yes.
all based on NASA to some degree. You just have to, so the NASA one, I gotta tell you, it'll kill you. I did it. I took it 3 times. It's 5 minutes and you're staring at a screen, and as soon as the numbers start counting up, you have to tap it. It's 5 minutes feels like a century. The fatiguometer was interesting in the sense that it had pictures of a person holding a ball, okay? The thing that you saw was the ball was either in their right hand or their left hand, but that person was sometimes upside down, sometimes facing you, sometimes backwards, sometimes tilted sideways, and you had to quickly identify which hand was in it and select right or left. It's a 2-minute test, and for me, I'd rather do that one any day than the NASA one. The NASA one it killed you. I'm just telling you, it was 5 minutes of that NASA test was like, I think you'd be asleep anyway. If you weren't asleep, you were going to be asleep. But we're not trying to find one that just makes Dave happy. We want one that's valid. We want it to work.
And in all the studies I've read, the initial tests were always 10 minutes long, but they've done other studies that are showing the 2 to 5 minute apps are just as effective as identifying fatigue as 10 minutes. So I don't think we need the full 10 minute that was originally designed for the PVT tests. There are handheld devices, but they're like a 10-minute test, and they download. They're kind of antique looking machines. But, I mean, they're out there, but I think we can do something much more modern and more effective. We also need to look at price point, which we have not heard from these guys yet, so.
And I think the NASA price point was $20 a person per year.
And then it'll be like, if we can download that information, so say it was a BC that was administering it, can he get access to those results, those kind of things? Is there an administrator application, those kind of things? So just like details that we need to research and look at.
Right.
Would you be able to bring examples or bring them on your computer next time we meet? So we can see them?
It's just, I emailed the vendors last week and they just started getting back. I had a bunch of emails today, so I was trying to go through and see which ones looked like they were viable, and you can bring those back maybe.
So Scott, I look at it like this. We're going to do a trial of 1 or 2 or 3 of them. We're just trying to get some lined up, and like the fatiguometer's already given us a 30-day trial, but it had some glitches. It's a little glitchy. I failed it twice already. I passed once and failed twice, so I don't know why. I don't know what it's referencing it. I didn't feel like it was going really slow. So before we present it, we want to make sure that we're understanding And then, my thought would be you guys would then demo it and see how you felt about it, and see if it was, and then if that felt better, we might expand the pool, because we're gonna give us 30 days. And so that's kind of what I see us doing, is going through and saying, okay, well, which one of these works? And the NASA one is easy, but like I said, I didn't see anywhere on the NASA one, short of creating your own study, how you got to that. But I'm sure it's available, it's just, we hadn't got to the point. Every time I did the NASA one, it just came up with a blank screen. It's like, okay, well, that didn't tell me anything, so I don't know what it's doing. It didn't tell me I passed, it didn't tell me I failed.
So the next thing that I want to talk about with these apps is who we're going to need to decide who determines the action level. If I'm given a ranking between 1 and 10, who decides that at a 7, this happens, at a 6, this happens, at a 5, this, who's going to decide that? It certainly shouldn't be me, because I'm not qualified.
So like the fatiguometer, literally, you could have an email list of 5 people if somebody fails. So like we would say, okay, maybe you take it when you come on shift in the morning, that sets your current, says you're rested, and then we do one in the morning, the next morning, if somebody fails. And I'm going to just tell you, fatiguometer, he told me, he says, look, we have recommendations of what to do for failures, because clearly they deal with this. I said, well, I want to hear what those are. So once we get a little more into that, then we'll find out what their suggestions are, and what are courses of action. Because right now, I don't even know what the data means. Right?
Well, according to what you said, it's not necessarily repeatable too. I mean, you took it once, you took it 3 times, you passed it once, and you failed it twice.
I don't want to try and tell you that that's because, I don't know. There was one time in the second one that I actually took a little bit to go, which way is that guy facing? Okay, maybe I'm just stupid, I don't know. Maybe it's repeatable, maybe there's a sensitivity, I don't know.
And we should make sure that if we're going to do an objective test, that it should be objective, and it should be repeatable, and it should be, it should test for what it's designed to test for.
Absolutely agree.
So, how often, we're going to have to decide how often we take it. Do we take it every day? Do we take it, this study says we should take it every quarter, but I don't know.
Is like a baseline?
As a base, no, they say take it every quarter. So,
how would that measure a fatigue? That seems...
It's a measurement for chronic fatigue. Is this application a measure of chronic fatigue, or is it a measure of acute fatigue? Those are things that I don't know that I think should be validated and that are important to determine if we're gonna select an objective test. The second thing that these guys recommend is to provide access to caffeine as a countermeasure to fatigue. Like I said, this is not my idea, that this is their recommendations. So that would mean that the department would buy caffeine. There's several things that they say, in what form are you going to get it, et cetera, et cetera.
And I can tell you on the fatiguometer, in there, as part of the tests on one of them, it does ask you, are you under the influence of caffeine at this point, or then there's other studies I've read that will say like 2 cups of coffee will bring you to this for this many hours. So those are things that we could have reviewed by somebody to be nurse.
The fourth thing that it says that we should do is we should provide EMS personnel the opportunity to nap while on duty. Captains and BCs would be authorized to shift crews to other units and/or require rest and/or call in overtime. Dr. Sandy would also add the caveat that not only would it be a top-down situation, but it would be from the bottom up if a paramedic or a firefighter felt that they were fatigued, that they could request that rest and/or other assignment. There's always the chance that that type of policy would be abused, but I think we have to implement a policy and then deal with the problems or the abuses as they come, and not implement a policy because it could possibly be abused. And then the next thing would be the department would provide education and training to mitigate fatigue and fatigue-related risks. So they would, some of the things that they talk about are hazards of fatigue, impact of chronic fatigue, how can fatigue be managed but not eliminated, adequate sleep is the key, basics of sleep psychology. So we would have to implement an education program, not only for our new hires, but for guys that are currently working for us. It's supposed to include, our fatigue policy should include key features like it should be written down. We should have a risk management portion of it. We should have a reporting portion. We should have an investigation. We should have training and education, and we should have internal and external auditing. Those were recommendations from this study. And then the other thing I think that would eliminate a lot of fatigue is to eliminate unnecessary risks would be, I think we should eliminate hospital transfers between the hours of 8 at night and 8 in the morning. I threw out those numbers because those are my favorite numbers, not for any other reason besides that. I think that would also reduce our risk and eliminate fatigue. So those 6, I think we should implement those 6 things in our fatigue policy and work out the details as we can. Is there anything else that you think we need to add to a fatigue policy?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
You said on one that EMS personnel would have the opportunity to nap, and then you went on to say some other things, and you said that BCs and captains had the ability to assign personnel to different units. Did you also include different stations, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think kind of the idea there was, let's say Station 3 gets beat up really bad one night. The captain says, hey, my crews, they're wrecked. Instead of taking that unit out of service, we could move them to Station 2, move Station 2's guys or split guys. We would have to be willing to be a lot more flexible with our assignments and our stations. I think that the point of that is I don't want to take units out of service so that they can rest, but if we could shift them to Station 5 or shift them to a less busy station so that their probability of rest was higher, as long as we were okay with doing that, I think that would meet the intent of this, Dr. Sandy's worry and the intent of the opportunity to nap or rest or, get some non-fatigue.
Would you also think that you could implement some of those, some of those practices in order to prevent fatigue rather than just to treat it on the back end? So maybe shift 1, you could catch up on some Z's, or you could shift personnel around before the fatigue sets in order to either prevent it or have the opportunity to then rotate out fresh crews and move people around to protect.
Yeah, I think it could look, we can make it look any way we want it to. I just think that we should at least address that with the understanding that we'll have to be a lot more flexible with
So
our...
Ryan, let me, just to kind of make sure I think I understand what you're talking about, but for example, let's just say there might be a policy where we say we're going to move somebody out to Station 5 preemptively, even though we didn't wait till they got hammered. We know that this station's extra busy generally, or you're saying we might move them out in a different fashion? Because my concern, and I think, Shane, this is kind of where, when you say we don't want to take a unit out of service because they're fatigued, I agree with that. We don't. But I also think we can't, and I don't know what that degree is, and I think that's where part of this objective approach is we want to make sure that we get to the point where we're saying, okay, you have a high probability of, we need to protect you now, because we don't want you to get to the point where you're so exhausted that you're in effect drunk, and now you really shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be working, right? You shouldn't be on a unit, whether it's just being protected or not. We kind of want to do that ahead of time.
Right, and I guess, quite honestly, that is one of my biggest frustrations is we're trying to develop this great big all-encompassing policy for the move to 4896 when we're not worried about it now. I mean, right now we do these things already, right? We send people that have been up all night on a transfer to Salt Lake at 2 a.m. I agree it's a problem. I agree we shouldn't do these things, but I don't think, I don't know, that's just one of my frustrations here because it's a super complex policy that no one else in the state even has or addresses. No one does. I talked to the battalion chief on duty at Idaho Falls today, and their policy for 4896 is if you're fatigued, the captain tells you to go get some rest. And there's understanding that if you have a class with an outside instructor or something going on the second day, you're still going to have to go to it, that you might be tired there, but you're still going to have to go to it. And that's how they deal with it. It's not this huge, super complex policy with apps and measures and all of these things to go in there. And I'm not saying we don't need to be the most proactive, best department in the country. It just feels like it's frustrating me because we're trying to invent something that no one else even feels is a problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, except that I don't.
Except for you. I mean, you feel it's a problem, but no one else does.
Well, okay, so I talked to Kevin Gray, and Kevin Gray says I don't have 2 medics on an ambulance. I rotate my medics constantly. Are you guys ready to split medics so we can move to 4896 so that they're protected? We're all different, Shane, and everybody has a different scenario. Idaho Falls has 130 employees? It's a different system. They still have a lot more depth than we do.
But their unit utilization is actually more than ours.
I don't think so, because last time I remember they were at 11,000.
I ran the reports last week. According to, for 2019 and 2020.
Okay, well. So you say our utilization is the same?
Their call volume per unit is actually more than our call per unit. So I don't know about unit utilization time. I don't have those numbers.
Okay, and they also don't have medics the way we have medics.
Right.
So again, we're back to they're not the same as us.
Well, no one's the same as us.
Okay, so we have to solve our problems.
Okay. But we're debating in a circle here. We're trying to solve a problem
You gave me a
no
whole
one
lot
else
of
thinks
things
is a problem.
that I think are appropriate. How often? We're going to have to. I think it's going to be on a shift basis. I think that the next question is what to do when you hit that fatigue meter. I think the concepts of moving people around to prevent that is the ideal, right? I mean, I think we've come to that. I think education's fine. I think I don't know about us buying coffee, but we'll figure that out too.
Like I said, I didn't make these up. Right? These are just recommendations from.
So it's a starting point. So I think that if we're going to have an objective measure, then the objective measure, then the next question is what to do with that. I don't know yet. That's part of this is reading the literature and understanding what these systems are. The systems that we're talking about are systems that are similar to ours. And so I don't feel like, it's fatigue is fatigue, chronic or otherwise. The whole concept, at least of the NASA study, has been it's your ability to maintain concentration for a period of time in order to have a fast enough reaction time. And if your reaction time is too slow, it's because you're tired, or if you can't maintain attention, then you're too tired. That seems pretty objective to me, and I think it seems pretty objective to whoever is taking the test, whether I'm a pilot, a DOT truck driver, a NASA astronaut, a doctor. It seems to me to be a reasonable thing, and then the question becomes, what do we do if you hit that point. Because I think part of our fatigue policy is trying not to hit that point, right?
Right.
Trying to not.
And I guess the point is why are we worried about this for next year when we're not worried about it for now?
Because you're wanting to work 48 hours, not 24.
Well, the policy is designed, or all these tests are designed for shifts of 24 hours.
Well.
They're not, they're saying
So the
24-hour
48 hours
shifts.
will make
are-
it worse.
But all I'm
40
saying is the test should be designed to test, it should be valid, right? And so if you're gonna test something and use an objective test, you should make sure that it's designed to test what you're wanting it to test for.
I don't
Right.
disagree with that.
And so if we're testing fatigue on a greater than 24-hour period, greater than 24, we work 24 now. So that's my point, is we're
understand
not
that.
concerned about it now. Why are we concerned about it in a year from now?
Because at a 48-hour level, it's going to be exacerbated. It will be worse.
You think it might be.
No, I don't think.
Show me the data to prove it. Do you have data to prove it? Do you have any studies that show it?
No, I don't have studies. I have studies that say you can't work 24 hours in a row. There's plenty of studies that do
Right,
that.
to say, well, that you shouldn't stay awake for 24 hours in a row.
There are
Right.
studies that say that after 24 hours of being awake, that you are effectively 0.1. So I feel like what you're trying to do is spend time talking me out of going this direction as opposed to let's just work through the
No,
process.
I feel like you're trying to convince us that we don't want to go to a 4896
No, I'm not trying to
instead of
convince
trying to implement the policy.
Well, we have a difference of perspective of what the policy is.
Right.
I believe the policy has to have a fatigue policy in it that does things that articulate our expectations of how to prevent fatigue and what happens when fatigue occurs.
Okay.
And I don't think that's an unreasonable backdrop.
I guess my concern though is that there's several other departments in the state that run this schedule, and based on experience, they don't perceive that to be a needed item. And they don't have that policy, so why are we trying to reinvent the wheel?
And I'm not saying it's a bad policy. I think fatigue is real, and I think that it's something that we need to address, but it
So I'm
seems
hearing
like,
two different things from two different people on your side of the table, and I'm going to tell you that we need to have a policy. I believe that that's at least at base the core of what we have to come up with in order to go to the 4896 from the city side. So we can all sit here and say, well, nobody else does it. I can tell you, clearly they're doing it. Otherwise, Fatiguometer and Jago PVT wouldn't be starting to stand up. Whether it's in the fire service we need it or not, then I would go back to we're not all the same. There are plenty of departments that do not run two medics. I think our medics are going to get hammered. Are you ready to go to split medics so that I can protect one so that I'm not taking an entire ambulance out of service? Because right now, we don't have enough people to say, okay, you two just got hammered on the ambulance. Oh, here's two more medics that are going to step in. There are different systems.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that what Shane and Andy are both trying to say is that we can look at fatigue, and it's certainly something that needs to be addressed, but it's a question of how intricate and detailed do we need to get on this policy? Like how...
I guess until we feel comfortable. To feel that we agree with the policy. That whatever that is. Okay, I said everything from last week when we talked, I said it could just be as simple as available hours to sleep, or it could be as detailed as a objective testing device that tells you when you're fatigued and then what to do when. I mean, he's outlined a lot of things. They all sound good to me. I mean, they all sound like a good springboard from which to identify. You know, you talk about shifting people around. I think, you know, Kevin Gray says he splits medics. He says he feels that's a totally different thing because he has a medic that's on an engine. When the ambulance gets hammered, he can move his medic over to the ambulance. that's on the engine.
Well, we've had a standing committee for most of the last year to look at deployment models and to do that. I think that's outside of the scope of what we're trying to do here. I mean, we've looked at deployment models, and I think that if we're gonna make a deployment model change it so that we've got one medic per ambulance, I think that's something that we need to decide independent of this.
Well, and I disagree with you because I feel like that's part of our system and it's part of the issue that we're gonna have shifting to 4896. Our ambulances are busy. The data says that they're busy. The point is, I don't have Chief Gray's ability to have a medic who's been resting on the fire engine who doesn't go on as many calls, and I can't move that medic, so I do think it's germane to this, and I think that's part of the problem is, and again, I guess I'll go back. I feel like if you guys feel like that TA was simply what date we were gonna start, why would they have, I don't feel that that's where we're at. I don't feel like that's what this was about. This was not about just simply picking a date and saying, okay, ready, set, go. It was about...
I don't think we said it was just about the date. I think it was about the date and department policy, but not continuing to negotiate the contract. Which is, we're not talking about the contract right here. We're talking about policy.
Okay, well, there's a fine line between the two. There is. So, I mean,
So I feel like we're at an impasse because we haven't, the basis of what we're here for is not what I understood we were here for.
okay, so what would you like to do? I mean, you just outlined a bunch of things that I thought were good things to start getting crafted into the framework of a policy, but now you're saying we're at an impasse.
How do you feel about the fatigue policy that was written into the implementation manual?
I don't feel like it has any, it's not objective, it's too soft in terms of the basics of, we're just gonna kind of weather the storm.
I don't know that that's what it said, but do you have a copy of it?
I don't. I don't have it here, so I'll be happy to reread it.
Okay. I guess I'm just trying to look for a point to not just get some things to start looking at, but maybe something we can say is kind of already built and we can add to it. Because it seems like every time we meet, it's always, well, this is a place to start looking. We'll start building some stuff. And maybe that's something we can work with if you guys are okay with. At least it is a framework to begin with.
So I guess, Scott, that from my perspective, Shane said he was going to go talk to Dr. Sandy. He said he did some research on this. You've got yours. Why don't you two get together and take some of the implementation things that he's got and write those into yours and then present it and say, well, here's the fatigue policy that outlines all these things. I would like an objective measure of fatigue, and I would like a fairly standardized course of action, some of which I don't have that data right now.
I guess.
So I can't tell you, if fatigue meter says, look, if the guy misses by, when we send you the test results, I'm spitballing because I don't really know, because we haven't had time to dive into that. If they say, this measure is not a big deal, but this measure is a really big deal, then I'm going to say, okay, what do I do when this measure? Do I say, well, go take a nap and come back and test yourself? But if it's this, then I take you off the line? That's what I want to know. And I want to know that from whoever we choose to go down the road of an objective test. And so, but I like the concept of these different things, baking those in.
I guess I would submit that the probability of finding an objective test for firefighters is going to be 0. They don't make one.
And why does it, I don't understand why firefighters are unique. Your fatigue is the same as everybody else's. The data doesn't suggest that fatigue is specific to a person.
if firefighters are not unique from every other worker, but we as a department are somehow unique from every other department, I feel like we're taking the same argument two different directions here. Like,
You're saying that other departments are succeeding at this, but
and in almost all ways, we are very, very much the same as every other fire department. We have the small things that make us different, but they don't make us stand out so much that we can't do the same things that they do with success.
and I don't know that it's successful.
And why would you say that?
Well, I can tell you that I hear a lot of people say that day 2 is pretty tough. I can tell you that there is some data out there that suggests that the Maydays are quadruple on day 2 of that there is starting to become some data that's being generated. I'm not going to say that it's a relatively new schedule, so a lot of people are not. But I can also say that I guess this is that you're trying to say, well, just because fire departments can do this, that it's right and it's working.
I'm saying that fire departments that are very similar to us in size and scope and service level do it. And they may not be exactly us, but they're very close to us, and they do it well. And the overall impact to their department has been positive. And they still run all their calls, they still put out fires, they still respond to EMS, you know.
So your perspective is that this implementation document should basically say when we're going to start.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we can write down things that are going to be relevant on the schedule, but we don't need to belabor these ideas so far and get so intricate and so detailed in things and try to come up with every possibility that we think could possibly be an issue when it's very unlikely to be, and every other department has dealt with it as it's come, if it even comes at them, with success. We have supervisors at multiple levels that can do what Ryan and Shane are talking about, can work to make sure that their guys are getting rest when they need it, give them the authority and the encouragement, and formally say, this is your job and you have the ability to do this. Shuffle guys around. Tell guys to go take naps. Say, hey, you know what? We had that training schedule today at the crew level. We're going to push it back an hour, and I want everyone to go to the room and close the door and turn the lights off. You know, like those kind of things. That's how we deal with this. That's how we can easily manage almost every situation we're going to be faced with. And if something unique comes up, we have a bunch of very smart people that work here that we can figure it out, I guess. Every other department has taken that approach and been successful.
And you're talking to their members, and I talk to the chiefs, and I hear a different story from the chiefs.
We've talked to the chiefs as well, and
Battalion chiefs?
yes.
Battalion chiefs are in the
Battalion
unit.
chiefs, deputy chiefs, assistant chiefs.
So Scott, I guess I'm not really sure then where do you guys want to go? Because I feel like you're basically telling me what you told me 3 or 4 months ago was that everybody else is doing this, it's no problem, we're going to make it happen. And I don't feel personally comfortable with that. I don't, I mean, we've gone through this. Nobody has told me, including these other departments, nobody has told me, what do you do when you have the big fire on day 1? And maybe they've never had the big fire, maybe they have.
They have.
What do they do
have.
with day 2? When you've worked 24 hours straight, what do you do? And I've just simply said, what is the solution to that? And nobody has told me what the solution is to that. Nobody has said, this is what we do. In your breath, you're in a sense, because here, I don't see how you as a captain can manage away the risk by saying, okay, we just fought fire for 30 hours, You're exhausted, go take a nap. But what happens when the tones go off in 10 minutes? And I just want it written down. I want it to be agreed that this is how we're gonna behave when that happens.
How do we address it if we have a fire that lasts 30 hours right now?
Generally, there's an oncoming crew.
Do we just wait for them to show up the next day?
Well, you fought fire for 24 hours. You're right, there's a risk in that too. We're doubling our risk by going to 48.
We have an all-call callback, and we get a whole bunch of crews to come in and backfill, and then we set up a rehab system where guys come off the fire, and oftentimes they're able to go back to their station, get some rest, get some food, and then come back to the fire.
Well,
And I think that's how you manage it. That's what we do now.
but we're not getting everybody in. It's not like we are getting everybody in. We're generally only getting a few in.
The last all-call we had, we staffed 3 engines and ambulances.
Okay, the last one.
We've only had a handful in the last 10 years.
How many?
A handful. I think we counted up maybe 10 in the last 20 years. So, and the last one had a highly successful callback.
Okay? So where do you want to go from here? I mean, in one breath, you've told me to read your fatigue policy. I've said, why don't you two get together, graph this in, but now you're telling me you don't really want to do that, so.
No, I think that the policy we gave you is a great policy to have for this situation, because it is one, or at least a start for it, because it's one that lines out all of the recommendations and authorities that we want to give to our supervisors to make sure people get rest when they need it. And it starts with a set of step strategies from the lowest level to the highest, being you may have to send someone home because they're too tired. But it lines out a process to use. And I think that's a place we should use to start this. And we could add a objective test if we want to it. We could add training on sleep to it if we want, but I mean, somewhere that we can start that we can get this thing built.
And I said I would review yours, but I would rather make sure that you two get together and then incorporate whatever the things that Shane felt should be included in this, from this recommendation. I don't. And while he's doing that, we will continue to evaluate some of these other options for tests. And when we find 1 or 2 or 3 that we feel might work, then we would say, okay, we'll bring those to you, and then you guys can evaluate them, and you can say, have your piece on that, and go from there.
Can we just take like a 2-minute break out in the hallway just to make sure we're all on the same page?
Sure.
I'll be right back.
All right, so just to be clear, we are in no way trying to say that we don't want a fatigue policy. And in fact, we wrote one into this originally because we do think it's reasonable and probably a good idea to have one. What we're saying is that it needs to be a policy that is focused probably more so on ensuring that people not only know that it's okay to do these things to manage your fatigue, but that it's encouraged to do it. And we're going to have these different levels of action depending on how tired people are. And so, I guess I'm just going to go ahead and hand this across right now, and we can say, plus objective fatigue test. I can say plus training on sleep and fatigue. So,
Okay. Well, are you giving me this copy then? This is what I can have?
if you want it, I mean, I can.
I
print
guess
it
I
off
would
anytime.
prefer to just, I've got it electronically.
Okay.
So,
And I guess, I don't know that we really want to be just going back and building this thing from scratch or within our own group and then bring it here just to present it, because every time we do that, it really just gets shot down. And so I want to do this as a group. We need to do this together.
well, I feel like that's what,
When you say go do this and bring it back to me, it's not us working together.
well, we only have 2 hours, okay? So it's not like we can do all the homework here. I think that we can as we get closer, we can start putting things up on the board and say, well, let's add this in, let's add that in, let's do this. We can start with this. If you want to plan for the next meeting, we can bring this up and we can start adding the things that we want to add. I mean, but this is a meeting that, in a sense, like it or not, we're negotiating what this policy is going to look like. And so we have to get through the process, and the more work that's done on the outside, the more homework that we get done. I mean, I'll give you an example. I did a lot, Autumn and I spent all Thursday and most of today looking at these various functions, okay? That's homework. I'm doing homework. So if you think I'm dragging my feet, I'm not. If you think I'm just trying to shoot it down, I'm not. I'm trying to find legit, but I'm doing stuff on my work time to try and come up with solutions to things that I see are problems. You can do the same. And you can bring it here, and you can bring, and we will narrow it down. The fact is, we're basically circling around the same objective test. It's an asset-based test. It's all based on the same criteria. So, all right, we're circling around that. We're getting closer. We're not on target exactly yet, but we're close. We've identified this. I'll reread it to refresh my memory. But, that's what I'm saying. I think we have to come here and have the discussions that are probably the more complicated discussions, but we still have to go out and do some homework and say, okay, here's what we've got. And we can spend most of our meeting time arguing about whether this is appropriate or not appropriate, and that we're going to spend a lot of time doing nothing then, because it's really going to be that we're debating whether or not what we should have. You just said we should have a fatigue policy. Then let's make one. We have some homework to do on terms of whether residency requirements can or can't be part of this policy, whether shift trade approvals can or can't be part of this policy. I'll do my homework on that. And I'll come back with an answer from my side, whether that's...
Well, okay. Are we still uncertain on the residency?
Yeah, I said I have a different take on what your take is your take, and I get that, Eric. I get what the contract says. My view and my understanding from my side was we are writing an MOU. All MOUs are, in a sense, the same thing. They are for deviations within the contract. And so right now, we're sitting down, which is kind of why we're doing this in the public format, why we're doing it this way. Our legal counsel felt like we could do this, but that we are crafting an MOU that comes out with a status that makes the city feel comfortable and you feel comfortable moving to a 4896. And so that's, from my perspective, my marching orders were, yeah, all those things that are concerns are on the table. Now, you have a different opinion, and that's fine. I'm not gonna try and change that, but I need to find out whether my side wants me to hold fast to that, or whether they're gonna have a different view. And I'm not, that's that. I mean, I'm not offended that you say you don't think we can negotiate. I'm just saying, well, that's not my understanding of what I was assigned to do. And, you know, I'm gonna go to my legal counsel and say, well, what do you want me to do and how does this work? And maybe he'll go, oh yeah, we can't do that. And maybe he'll say, no, that's exactly what we're doing, is we're doing an MOU.
Okay.
I mean,
Well, we'll work on this, this framework with Scott's, and we'll bring it to the next meeting ready to hammer out a little
and
more.
we can get it up on a screen, you know, and we'll continue to work on this. Hopefully, it would be my goal before we meet to have at least 2 or 3 of these PVT applications available to kind of dance around and see. I mean, my gut feeling is they all kind of measure the same thing, you know.
Sounds good.
The ones that I found don't. I mean, they measure quite a broad spectrum from, some of them are designed specifically for patients with ALS. And so they're saying, this week, how do you feel? Do you feel?
Well, none of these are how do you feel. None of the ones that we've looked at are the how do you feel ones. These are reaction and your ability to interpret.
So have you run into a study called the KSS study?
I haven't done that one. I did see that there were multiple ones that you could.
That reference that, and it's things like, physically I feel exhausted. I have problems to start things. I have problems to think
So
clearly.
Shane, I'm not looking for one like that.
But that's what I'm saying is these tests I don't think are valid for what we're looking for.
Well, I'm not going to use a test like that. So if that's the test, I wouldn't use that one.
Yeah, I haven't looked at anything that.
So I'm going to be clear. I'm not going to use a how do you feel test. I'm going to use the NASA test that you talk about. The 2 tests that we've looked at look exactly like the NASA test, slightly different. One is simple. I liked the fatigometer because it wasn't just how quickly did you recognize the digits starting and then responding. It was analyzing a more complicated, and that's what they actually said, is theirs was better at saying, are you able to make cognitive decisions, or are you too exhausted to make cognitive decisions? I'm not saying that's the one. I'm not saying that I'm sold on it. I'm just saying that to me seemed reasonable. But I'm not making this decision on my own, and I'm not making it, you guys, that's part of this process, is we'll sit down and we'll put it up on the screen. When we get a point, we'll show how it works, then we'll give you access to it, we'll let you play with it, we'll let you look at the results, we'll let you see how it plays out, and then we'll pick one.
And that's my goal, is when we get these demos, that I would set each of you up as a user, that way you could log in and try it and actually have hands-on experience, and come back to the discussions, and you could, you guys could pick it apart at that point, so, and see what's good and what's not gonna work for you guys, so.
Sounds good.
Anyways, I'm just waiting for some of the vendors to give me that kind of access so that we can get in there and do that.
When are we going to meet next?
So I asked when the council chambers is available. It looks like August 10th and August 16th, anytime in the morning before noon. And then August 17th, they have the afternoon, 1:30 to 3:30. But the 10th and the 16th, anything from 8:30 to 12 is probably open at this point.
think either of those days are good for me.
I'll be gone until the 17th.
Will you be back by the afternoon of the 17th?
Yeah.
That works for me as well.
1:30 to 3:30 on August 17th, is that an option for everybody else?
Yes, for me.
Is there earlier options?
No, not on the 17th. The mayor already has this room booked.
Yeah, I'm sure I can make it.
17th is good?
17th?
All right, 17th, 1:30 to 3:30.
All righty.
Enough for today?
I think so.